paint water, whether it's calm, quiet, tranquil scenes like the picture behind me, or turbulent water, the sea moving, crashing waves on the rocks. When I lived in Scotland, I was able to visit the sea more often. Now here in France, it takes a little bit longer to get to the coast, but even so, I enjoy the roll of the sea, the movement of the sea, and this is what we're going to paint today. So let's paint. First of all, I want to share with you some of the paintings that I've done over the years of different seascapes with different colour palettes. The first one here is the north of Scotland, and I've used a combination of Payne's Grey and Indian Red to create almost a dark purple with a little hint of blue in the sky. I've used a rough grain paper, and this is what we will use today to make the same effect. The rougher texture on the paper gives you the opportunity to create this feeling of texture and movement. The colours are unusual for sea. We often think of blue sea or green sea, but somehow this combination gives that lovely stormy effect. I've also got another study here with a different colour palette, using cobalt turquoise as my main blue, but also with a little hint of Indian Red, using the foreground, the rocks in the foreground, to give that feeling of the crashing waves. Again, the paper is rough texture. I think this is Fabriano Artistico rough paper. The previous one was Arche, and it's Arche paper that we're going to use today. And then changing the palette completely, we've got a kind of a very stormy sky with the waves. It's a bit more subtle, there's less contrast, and I've used cobalt turquoise here to produce the effect of the rolling wave, combined with Indian Red. The colours we're going to use today are similar, but I'm going to incorporate some rocks into the picture, which gives us the opportunity to learn another technique. So there we are. We'll get started now. Let's paint. Okay, to begin, we have a piece of Arche 300 gram 100% cotton watercolour paper, torchon or rough grained. Torchon is the French word for rough grained. This is going to be for our seascape. I have, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this, but I have just basically put in a very, very fine indication of where I want the rocks to be in this seascape. But I really don't like doing much pencil work, and so it is very basic, and I'm not really sure whether I'm going to follow it really well. But the first thing we must do is look at the palettes that we've chosen. And here I've got cobalt turquoise on the palette, and then here I have Indian Red, further back Payne's Grey, and then ultramarine blue. It's always a good idea to try out your colours before you start, and so I'm going to put the paper to the side and get a little scrap of the same paper, Arche 300 gram 100% cotton, because only then can you see how the colours are going to work. And I'll take my number 10, well, actually that's not number 10, this is number 10, which would be a better brush, because we need quite a lot of colour available on the palette. And the first thing I'm going to do is to get the cobalt turquoise going, a nice puddle of colour on the palette. love cobalt turquoise. It does granulate as well, which means that when it's suspended in water on the paper, the pigment clusters into granulations, into clumps of colour. And when you're using a rough grain paper like this, it sits in the roughness of the grain and helps to give us more texture, which is what we want for this seascape. So just adding a little bit more water, so we've got a generous puddle. Okay, see how much the brush holds. This is a natural sable brush, so it does hold a lot of colour. And then we'll go to the Indian red, which is a wonderful colour. Very invasive. It mixes well but then separates quite readily, so you do get an interesting combination of tones when you use it on rough texture paper. I'm going to add a little bit of the Indian red now to the corner here of my cobalt turquoise, because I want the two to blend. I don't want to lose the cobalt turquoise totally, so I'm going to incorporate some of the cobalt turquoise into the mix, but only on one side. See, it turns first of all into a grey, and then if we persist, it becomes more and more blue. I love mixing colours. So many people kind of shorten the procedure and don't spend enough time, but spending time with the palette helps you to really get to know the colours properly. Okay, right, I'm going to wash my brush, and on my little bit of tester paper, just going to start out by adding some colour. I already did a little line, which I don't know if you can see, but that was of a more dilute mix. Let's just see how it looks. We've got that lovely soft grey, and now I want to add water. So there's scope to have quite a stormy sea here. I'm going to work at this end of the palette also, so I have a more blue mix, this end. Add a little bit of that. And then we see we've got the scope to have a wonderful range of colours. We need to add water to see how the mix goes, but I'm quite happy with that. That's a very stormy sea, very stormy sea. So that will be lovely. Okay, now the next preparation before we start, I need to find the horizon line on my paper. And it's okay going in with a big brush, but really we don't want a wibbly wobbly horizon line. So I put the sample paper to the side and take my large paper again. I have a ruler here, which seems an odd thing to have, but a ruler will help me to get an accurate horizon line. And I reckon the horizon line is going to be about here. Now, I have a few options. We could do a pencil line, but if we do a pencil line, it will be visible because watercolour is transparent. I don't really want that. So I have two other choices. I can use a watercolour crayon, which I have here. This watercolour crayon is soluble in water, so we can do a line with the watercolour crayon just faintly. When we come to put paint on, the watercolour crayon will blend with the watercolour and we won't see it, unlike we would see an ordinary pencil line. And the other option is to go in with a brush, a fine brush, like this number 1 liner, and paint the line putting the ruler at an angle like this so we can then follow the line. This is a bit trickier. If you're not sure, you're better to go with your watercolour pencil. But I think I'm going to go with this. Just take a little of my cobalt turquoise and very carefully just run along the groove made by the tilted ruler. So there I have a very, 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 very faint, simple line, which I'm going to just brush gently with the watercolour brush, with the number 1 brush, just along. I don't want a net line, I don't want a line which is too visible. I'm just adding a little bit of colour. Okay, right, so that's my horizon line. Hope you can see it. It's not very visible. Really, it's difficult to get the light right. But now we're ready to start. So, off we go. I'm going to speed up the next part of the video and give a commentary as well, so that it doesn't become too long and tedious a procedure. So, off we go. So the first thing we're going to do is to do the sky, and as you can see with the number 10 mop brush, I'm just wetting the sky area which we've defined with the line that I did earlier. It needs to be shiny wet, and I'm dropping in some of the colour that I've mixed, which is my cobalt turquoise and Indian red combination. We let the colour run, drop more in so that we have a combination of grey and cobalt turquoise, and it's just a question of distributing it and not leaving it too long in one place so that we get a stormy look. I'm using a smaller brush now just to make sure that the sky meets the horizon. And immediately now, with my small liner, I'm starting to add the colour of the sea, again using the same combination of colour. Of course, this is speeded up, as you see, don't really work that fast, but I'm leaving little spaces for the tops of the waves because this is a stormy sea, and working my way down the page, adding colour in different tones, different nuances of the mix on the palette. Because these two colours split and don't always stay together long, I can dip in different parts of the palette and add subtle differences of blue and grey. And as we move down the paper, the gap between the lines that I'm working become bigger because the waves are closer and more widely spaced. I'm adding water as I go so that the paint can run, and because the cobalt turquoise is a granulating colour, it produces texture as it runs. And you can see now I'm just adding water to certain areas, and this is where I want the paint to run into. These are the tops of the waves, and you can see just in the light there the areas which are now wet. And then I can apply the paint between these areas, but just touching the areas that are wet, with the result that I'll get the tops of the waves. I've changed to a bigger brush now because I want to work quite quickly. Not as quickly as we're seeing here with the video, but quickly anyway, because I don't want the wetter areas to dry. It's quite a spontaneous way of painting, which I enjoy, and this is really what I'm hoping that you'll be able to learn and take on board, that you can work quickly and get an effect which is exciting and interesting, I've added more darker colour, and this is to emphasise the foam of the wave as it turns. And there'll be more contrast to add as we go. Just a little tipping of more colour under the part that is the foamy crest of the wave, just to emphasise it, as you see. Just move it a little now, just to let the colour settle. And now, oh yes, I must have inadvertently got a blue blob on the edge of the paper. Rather than going with a kitchen roll and try to dab it off, the best plan is always to loosen it with a brush and then wet it and take it off, which I seem to have done quite effectively. And now I'm going in with more darker colour, again to emphasise the crest of the waves. The sea is really rolling in, and that's the effect that I really wanted to produce. You can almost see the area now which is the rock area. Because that's the next stage, is to now go in with my dark palette, which is a combination of Payne's Grey and Indian Red, which I can put on generously. Again, the video is speeded up, just giving us the contrast between the fluidity of the waves and the rocky structure, the rocky outcrop. Because the two colours don't combine readily, some of the redness of the Indian Red will be visible, and this all adds to the interest of the rock as it this area is dry, of course. I haven't wet it first because I want the colour to be really strong. I think I've been a little bit too generous in my mixing with the Indian Red, but that's okay. It gives texture to the rock and makes it look more realistic. And as you can see, I'm painting it on in the direction that the rock is sloping into the sea. Drop some colour on as well. All adds to the interest and the texture. Now I'm using water just to soften the edge where the sea meets the rocky outcrop. The colour's running a little, but that's okay. I can go along and soften it and then take some of the colour off with the bigger mop brush. There we go. That mop brush works really efficiently to apply paint and also to remove it when needed. A bit more movement helps. As it dries, the sea's gone lighter, and so I need to add more texture and more contrast as we go. Apologies for the noise on the phone. Technology just fights back. Here we've got the little rocky outcrops that are in the sea, again darker, but I'm just using water just to feather in the water, the spray, as it's hitting the rocks. Just adding more darker colour on this edge on the bottom corner there, just to help to give something for the waves to be breaking against. I'm not going to go into too much detail there, just let the colour run, and then add more definition, just not all over but in some places. And finally we go back to the cobalt turquoise and Indian red palette, and this will give me a chance to add a little bit more definition to the crest of the waves there by adding colour underneath as the wave curls over. Using the little liner brush, and just then taking the colour and just moving it across. The rough paper gives us texture. Of course, there's more we could do. We could add more detail. We could put a headland in the background. And indeed, if the white crest of the waves wasn't sufficient, we could add gouache white to it. But I don't think we really need to do that for the purposes of this demonstration. What I really want you to take away when you see this video is that you can create wonderful effects just by letting the paint and the water work together on the paper. And there we are, our seascape. Well, I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. The method of watercolour painting that I like to use is very free and spontaneous. It helps you to understand how the water can be used to create different effects. It's just a piece of paper at the end of the day, and that's what I want you to enjoy, the pleasure of putting the paint on the paper. I'll leave you with the stormy sea that we've just created. Happy painting till the next time. Bye.